I'm Ron McLellen,
And I'm Kevin Powers
and this is Conversations
in
in
horror. So
Again.
this. All right, I'm Kevin L. Powers.
No, I was just saying it's Conversations in Horror
Oh, I thought you
again.
wanted to. Oh. All right, so this week we are discussing 80s slasher films because that's something that's very dear to all of our hearts. Is the great 80s films because they influenced the 90s and the 2000s and are now being currently remade during modern day times. So we're gonna spend a little time with those this time.
A lot of them. Some of them in 3D.
Yep, some of them in 3D. But I'd like to say one of the reasons why I believe 80s slasher films are still so relevant today is because that we like our killers and serial killers back then because they had masks and they had great kills when they killed their victims. And it was really all about, that last surviving female who went one-on-one with the killer at the end. We all kind of like that. What about you?
Yep. That's the way. I mean, it got to the point where it was just people would write a story and make it a whodunit, and one of the characters in the story is the killer in a strange and mysterious costume, whether it be a fisherman's costume or an Arctic parka or a mask or whatever.
And a lot of the times, it was the mask that really kept coming back in sequels. I mean, what would Jason Voorhees be without the hockey mask, or Michael Myers without his mask?
Right.
And all those series were born in the 80s. So,
and those spawned kind of a spin-off. Well, the ones with the whodunit type slasher films were kind of a spin-off of the what I call the 80s horror films, where there actually are monsters who are the slashers, like Jason and Freddy and Michael Myers and The Burning and so on and so forth, where they're not really just people dressed up in a costume, they're actually monsters. Yeah.
So now that you know exactly what we'll be talking about today, let's go ahead and get started.
Well, I'm looking at some cool Friday the 13th stuff here that we all love. Friday the 13th. Uh-oh. Friday the 13th. Do you remember Friday the 13th Part 3? Where you finally get to see Jason's mask?
Well, we can go off with that, but we'll start with the original Friday the 13th, which was in 1980, the beginning of the decade. What did you think about it?
It was cool. It was different. It was not Jason. It was his mother, Mrs. Voorhees.
Yeah, but with Friday the 13th, the original one, it really was a whodunit because you didn't know who was the killer until the very end. That's one of the aspects that I like the most about that film, and which is why it's still one of my favorites of the whole franchise.
Well, yeah, it was a straight up whodunit. So it was kind of the Godfather, but it was they didn't really wear costumes. You just never saw the killer until the end. So instead of hiding the killer with a mask or a costume, they just never showed you the killer. It was always either point of view killer or victim turns around and looks at camera. Once again, point of view killer. But you never really saw the killer until you find out it's Mrs. Voorhees at the end.
No, but you had some great kills in that, especially with the beheading of Mrs. Voorhees herself at the very end.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was awesome.
So, that's one of the reasons why I really love Friday the 13th. I mean, I'm not that big of a fan of many of the sequels, but I am a huge fan of the original one.
I'm a fan up until Part 8. I kind of drew the line with the Manhattan thing. But I like 1 through 7, especially I like 6 is my favorite sequel because he's just a straight up zombie. Straight up zombie. Crawling out of the lake, slimy, nasty zombie in number 7, and a crawling out of the grave, dirty, nasty zombie in number 6. So he's a zombie in both of those. And then Part 8, it just gets ridiculous. And it stays ridiculous all the way to, believe it or not, Jason X, which was actually a halfway decent film.
Okay, so what do you think about the next one on our list? Sleepaway Camp, which was 83 film.
Well, that's exactly what it is. It's camp. It's 100% unadulterated camp.
Is that because it takes place summer camp, or is it just
Well,
funny?
it's the way the
campy?
movie. I mean, yeah, right. It's just plain campy. I mean, it's the way the movie was made. For God's sake, it's made to be a camp movie. You know, it's every part of it's camp. It's the ridiculous innuendos, the ridiculous lines,
The foul language
the
thrown
foul
throughout the whole
language,
movie.
the blatant just I'm going to go have sex and I'm about to die scenes, which happen over and over. So it's it's to me. I like Sleepaway Camp. It's fun. I like Angela.
Surprisingly, I love Felicity Rose in that one, but I'm a fan of the second and third one only because that they're really campy, and they went more into the vein of trying to go crazy with the kills.
Well, they got like Nightmare on Elm Street because they didn't really get campy as they went on. They just got ridiculous.
Yeah,
and kind of comical. And so did the Sleepaway Camp movies. And
which is really only remembered for the very end of the film reveal. Really, I mean, most people really just recall Sleepaway Camp because of that big reveal at the end, and they kind of forget most of the stuff that's in between.
Because it's like Return to Horror High, that kind of caliber of campiness, you know, which is George Clooney's first real movie, and he's in it for like 5 minutes. But that's the same kind of camp that Sleepaway Camp has going on. And these are early 80s movies, so there's a lot of that going on, and they all debuted at the drive-in. So, you know, so that's kind of how things were going down back then, is if you have a really campy horror film or a really campy action film or a really campy whatever film, it's going to get released in the drive-in.
Yeah, I agree. Now, next is one of my favorites, which is House on Sorority Row.
And I've never seen it. I may have seen it. I don't know if I have or not.
I know that there was a remake called just Sorority Row recently, not too long ago, probably
saw
6 years ago. But the original House of Sorority Row is very much like your typical slasher film where a house full of women are terrorized by a killer. But I liked the story a little bit more than I expected it to, and it was a film that needed a remake because it really is dated now, unlike some of the other films in the 80s. It's really dated, but it has that quality that a lot of people who love 80s films really like.
A lot of these old horror films are dated, like Pieces. See, and then there's those damn movies. Those damn $5 movies. You know, Don't Look in the Basement and Pieces and
gratuitous violence and blood and gore, which the 80s had a lot of.
Shot with almost no lighting and a terrible camera and a terrible cinematographer and terrible sound. And you see them on all of these multiple movie discs now. Mm-hmm. You know, now the Burning, which is the next. Now back to Sorority Row. I like the weapon the killer in the remake had.
Yes, that's really
really cool. Kind of reminded me of the Creepers from Jeepers Creepers weapon a little bit. But the Burning, that was Cropsey, right? Wasn't that his name, Cropsey?
Yep. That was one of...
it was one of your first Vengeance.
Tom Savini did the special effects in that one.
Which he did for Friday the 13th as well. But the Burning, it was one of those... Well, Friday the 13th was a lot of them were Vengeance-based. Jason was a Vengeance killer. Cropsey's a Vengeance killer. Because they burned him from a practical joke. There were a lot of those practical joke serial killer movies. I think actually Return to Horror High was one of them.
It was a very common motif.
There were several of those where a practical joke went bad.
Well, with The Burning, I love the special effects that Tom Savini did, but I just really didn't care for the movie as much. Nope. I haven't seen it in years, so that might be a film I need to revisit one day in order to give a better outlook on it. But yeah, it has been a long time since I last saw The Burning, so I'm not that big of a fan of it.
And if you're a Seinfeld fan, it's one of Jason Alexander's first movies, if not his first movie. I'm not sure if it is or not, but he's young, but he looks just like Jason Alexander. It's like that guy never got tall. Ever. But he's kind of funny in it too, so that's pretty cool. You kind of get to see an early look at Jason Alexander. Hell Night, same year as The Burning.
Oh, Hell Night, I really enjoy.
81.
That's a Linda Blair starring film that they ended up going into a house that has these mutant characters who kill all the people who come into the house.
And I think that's the first movie she did since Exorcist 2. Is that right?
I'm not sure. I can't remember what date Exorcist and Exorcist 2 came out. So
I think Exorcist 2 came out 79. So that would be like her third movie. Or something to that extent. She's young and cute. Sort of like Chloe Moretz is now. They're in that young and cute phase. You know they're going to grow up to be hot. But right now they're just young and cute, so you can't say anything about them.
okay. I'm sure
Linda Blair still looks good, though. I saw her on Supernatural not long ago, and she looks really good.
What's next on our list?
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, the original Nightmare on Elm Street. All right, Freddy Krueger time.
Coming for you.
I've always been a fan of Wes Craven's films because he's a director who knows how to create suspense in his films.
Right.
He doesn't rely on a bunch.
What was that? Listen. What is that? Better stay up late. I remember that. Yep, Freddy. Ready, Freddy. Another one who went wacky doodle. Part 2 was just a complete homo fucking erotic, weird, I don't even want to go any further with it movie. And then the rest of them were just ridiculous, funny. But Freddy was cool. The first one was a real horror movie.
Yeah, well, Wes Craven likes to do suspenseful movies, and hence when he left the series, it became less suspenseful. They relied more on the comedy aspects and on the kills that he does. So.
And he did a good job with Scream by adding a little of that comedy, but not too much ridiculous like he did in the... Well, he didn't do all the Nightmare remakes, of course. But when he came back to New Nightmare, it was kind of more like the first one. He took away all that funny Freddy shit and made it more of a serious, pissed off Freddy. So he really didn't have anything to do with the stupid sequels up to New Nightmare. But yeah, he does that really well in his movies.
Yeah. All right. Next on the list is our holiday favorite, Silent Night, Deadly Night, which is 84.
Billy. Another vengeance killing killer.
Yep. It was very, like I said, very prevalent in the 80s.
I like the remake.
Silent Night?
Yeah, I like it.
Wasn't too big a fan of the original.
Well, I liked it because it wasn't really a remake. The guy's name wasn't Billy, and he carried a freaking flamethrower, which was badass. I like that a lot. And he threw somebody in a chipper, which was double badass. So that movie was cool. I'm not saying it was a well-written movie, but whoever did the effects and the kills kicked ass.
Yeah.
And I like the costume, too. And it had a good feel to it, a good vibe to it. It was nice. Billy, however, original Silent Night, Deadly Night, that's one of those hard-to-watch movies. Because it's just, I don't know, campy.
It's become dated.
It's become extremely dated.
But, like most franchises that started off in the 80s, the continued sequels got even more ridiculous because they went further and further away from the original story.
Right.
I mean, there was 5 Silent Night, Deadly Night films, and each one delved even further away from the original, kind of like the Howling sequels,
Yep.
It happens in some franchises, especially 80s movies,
Well, but Silent Night, Deadly Night has its place in horror history, of course. It's a Christmas horror movie.
Which are very rare and very,
That and Black Christmas were probably the only 2 really big ones, and the stuff you saw on Tales from the Crypt and shows like that. Other than that, the only 2 big ones back then was the original Black Christmas and Silent Night, Deadly Night. There was another one called Silent Night, Bloody Night, which was another one of those don't look in the basement movies.
Yep. I remember that.
All right, but that was 84. We have to go back to 81 now for Funhouse, Toby Hooper's Funhouse. And I want to ask you a question because I haven't seen it in so long. Was Tom Hanks in that freaking movie?
No, not the.
What was the horror movie Tom Hanks was in that they were at a carnival? There's a horror movie Tom Hanks is in. He's really young. And they're at a carnival. Okay, everybody out there, if you can think of that movie, send us a message and let me know what movie. It's a horror movie. Tom Hanks is young, and they're in or at a fair or a carnival.
Okay.
It's not Funhouse. I was thinking it may be, but obviously it's not.
No, it's not Funhouse.
Funhouse is the one where the creepy dude, the freak, wears the Frankenstein mask. which looks better than how he really looks.
And it's another one where they're trapped. A group of kids are trapped inside of a carnival and get menaced and killed one by one by a
Creepy
creature.
dude wearing a Frankenstein mask
So
and his sidekick.
and it was one of the classic Tobe Hooper. Very little on plot and story, but very big on gore and suspense. Kind of like Eaten Alive or Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
And here Kevin has put on our list Alligator, which now he has turned to the animal kingdom as a slasher. When you should have put right after this Grizzly, which was made 3 years earlier or 2 years earlier.
Unfortunately, that one is a typo on our list, so we won't talk about Alligator this time, but maybe next time.
Alligators can be slashers too.
Other than the fact that
So
I
can
enjoyed
grizzlies.
the movie.
We're going to talk about animal slashers one day.
Next on our list, though, is going to be The Fog.
John Carpenter's The Fog.
John Carpenter's The Fog, which had Another Revenge.
It had the
plot
Carpenter
line.
cast in it.
Yep.
Tom Atkins, his lovely wife, Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis. Let's see who else. Charles Cyphers. He played Lincoln. Hal Holbrook.
Lots of people.
There was a lot of stars. Oh, and Janet Leigh was in it. There was a lot of people in that damn movie, and it was good and it was creepy.
Yep.
The sequel with Superman in it sucked.
You mean the remake?
Yeah, well, remake. Yeah, remake with Superman in it sucked. No bueno. Blows balls. So don't even spend your time, but you probably already seen it and figure that out for yourself. Motel Hell. Let's bury them up to their neck in the ground and cut their freaking tongues out.
I love Motel Hell. That's a guilty pleasure for me. That's one of my favorite films.
You hear that shit and it just tripped me out the first time I heard it. And they're buried up to their damn neck. I'm like, why did he do that?
I still really enjoy that movie, though.
I like his pig mask he wears. What was his name? What was his name?
The character's name?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Now you got me forgetting what his character name is.
I'll remember it in a minute. We'll move on.
We'll move on to Prom Night. From Canada comes Prom Night.
You know, Jamie Lee Curtis did that shit in The Fog the same year, really?
Yeah, she was very busy back
She
then.
was a busy horror girl.
I
like Prom Night. Once again, it's dated.
The Revenge.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
it's a revenge killer and it's dated.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's dated because of all the disco dancing that's in it. If it didn't have the disco dancing in it, I'm sure we would all watch it more often.
Right.
But it reminds us of a dead time period in history that we don't want to relive.
And in 1980, disco was on its way out. They were trying to do some kind of strange resurgence. I don't know. But
I do want to add that it is one of Leslie Nielsen's final roles, serious roles, because after that he got pigeonholed as doing stupid spoof comedies.
What year did Creepshow come out? The first one. 82?
80. Nah, I think about
86 was that? Because he was a serious role in that, although he was a little tongue in cheek, but he was kind of serious in that. But now, Terror in the Isles. Are you referring to the Donald Pleasance Terror in the Isles?
I am the one that does mostly all of the slasher films in it.
Yep.
It's a love
Swedo
song.
documentary.
A love song for slasher flicks. Where was it? That was Jamie Lee Curtis too, and Donald Pleasant, or was that Nancy Allen? I always forget.
Nancy who?
Nancy Allen. That may have been that.
Nancy Wallace?
Allen. Nancy Allen.
Who's Nancy Allen? Oh, the blonde-headed girl.
That may have been
Yes.
Nancy
It
Allen.
was Nancy Allen, yes.
Okay. Nancy Allen, who...
The girl from Friday the 13th.
Talk about all of the slasher flicks from that period.
Yeah.
So we all kind of love that one. That being a weird little best-of movie of slashers.
April Fool's Day I've not seen in so long, and I only saw it once at the drive-in.
Oh, I enjoyed April Fool's Day.
The year I got out of the Navy.
Most of the people hate April Fool's Day because of it's all a joke at the end of the movie. Sorry if I gave something away if you hadn't seen it already.
You hadn't seen it by now? Really?
It has some creative kills in it, but the movie's end is what destroys it for most audiences because they don't want it to be a joke. They want it to be, real. So, unfortunately, the movie doesn't really hold up because of that. But it's good.
And then we have our, pre-Skynet take on machines gone crazy and killing people Chopping Mall,
Oh, Chopping Mall.
which had no stars whatsoever. Zero that I know of. One guy that kind of looked like a star, but he really wasn't. But
Some
the
of them
movie
were-
was actually fun.
It was extremely fun. I think
Have a nice
you
day.
I think you were the one that passed me off to Chopping
did.
Mall because I had never seen that until you told me to see it.
First time I saw it was on TBS Nightflix.
Oh wow, that was a long time ago.
I was like, that was a cool movie. And I was afraid to watch it again because a lot of those movies I thought were cool back then. I watch them now and I'm like, that's just horrible. So that was not one of them. That was watchable. It's like, what's my favorite alien infestation of human bodies movie?
I don't know.
Oh, yeah, you do. God, see,
Alien?
I'm drawing a blank. No. It takes place at the college. Tom Atkins is in it.
Oh, you mean Night of the Creeps?
Night of the Creeps. Thank
Night
you.
of the Creeps.
So it's like that caliber of horror, and that same look and the whole 9 yards. It would fall in well with a box set with those two movies together. But it's just these rampageous mall security robots who go on a killing spree and are after these kids who are trapped after hours in a mall. And it's all about their not wanting to get killed, but everybody in the audience wants them to get killed because it's cool to watch the robots kill them, and they kind of make out everybody except for one girl to be dicks. So, all right, so we're gonna go pop on over to '86 with some C. Thomas Howell action and some Rutger Hauer action and the Hitcher.
And the Hitcher, which still holds up extremely well today, in my opinion.
One of the freakiest movies I ever saw.
Yes, and Jennifer Jason Leigh, I believe, in an early role of hers. But I think that's such a very tense film because of C. Thomas Howell and Rutger Hauer, who have this great rapport with each other in this cat and mouse chase throughout the whole movie.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it still holds up really well today, despite the ludicrous movies that C. Thomas Howell has now been saddled with.
And then the kick you in the teeth ending is pretty good too.
Yes.
But if you haven't seen The Hitcher, watch it and forget about the remake because it's the same but different. It's sort of like watching the remake of Psycho.
The same but different. Okay.
So we're going to move on to Stepfather, another year later, '87, with our favorite evil stepdad. Instead of the Wicked Stepmother, it's the Wicked Stepfather.
Yep, with Terry O'Quinn in
Terry
one of
O'Quinn.
his signature roles, of course, before he got into Lost.
Right. Got into Lost and then went on to be in Falling Skies.
And so he did 3 Stepfather films, but the first one's the most tense and interesting out of all of them because it's the beginning. A lot of the sequels kind of lose their punch, but this original one is still good.
Well, they
even
lose their
today.
punch because you know what the hell's going to happen. I mean, it already happened once. You just get to see him do it to other people.
Yeah, and it's a franchise film. People weren't expecting the first one to be so well, liked and
But I have to
appreciated.
admit, I did like it that he changed his cons. The con was different. It wasn't the same old con.
Okay.
So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I just remember the first one. I've kind of buried the second and third one in my brain somewhere since I haven't seen those in so long.
All right, American Gothic, '88. I do not even remember. I remember seeing the movie, but I remember not a lot about it.
Rod Steiger and his crazy little family who meet up with these more progressive people who then are killed one by one by the family. There are some interesting choices made in that movie. Rod Steiger, for one, since you're not really accustomed to seeing him in a horror film, and he's like front and center in this one. So, it's one of those type of movies. I think it holds up okay, but it's not one of those films that make a lot of cult lists. So I think it's been kind of lost and forgotten over the years.
And don't confuse this with the movie Gothic, which is a totally different movie.
And that is a Ken Russell film, which is totally different and has to do with Gothic settings and erotic
It's a weird movie.
It is a weird movie. It's a Ken Russell movie. I haven't seen it in a long time, but
It's like watching watching a Lynch film. Okay, moving on to bad toys and Chucky dolls and Child's Play.
which came out in '88.
Yeah, the
And-
first one was awesome.
I think the first one still holds up even today, and that being a franchise that has not been remade, still lives on, and for good reason. It's the first film when it came out was extremely scary and unpredictable, and it was totally flipped a switch on killer doll movies and kids in jeopardy.
Well, and not only that, but it followed the same path as a lot of the other slasher films that kept making sequels in the 80s. Jason, Freddy, all those guys. Because, I mean, it was just, they got a little more silly as they went on. And then they went back to serious again in modern times with Chucky. Because the new one is pretty cool. And he's a nasty, mean little son of a bitch, like he's supposed to be.
Curse of Chucky.
Yes.
That's why I say that franchise is still going strong. As long as they keep Brad Dourif playing the voice of Chucky, I think it'll still be a great franchise.
Yep.
And Don Mancini keeps writing them and or directing them. I think it'll still be going strong for a while.
I like to think of the 80s as the slasher heyday because there were so many slasher movies made in the 80s. It's not like it was the beginning of the slasher era because it wasn't. John Carpenter says Psycho was the first slasher film, and other people say Halloween was the first real slasher film. But trust me, John Carpenter took a lot of his ideas from Michael Myers, from Norman Bates, and other things. But that's when you had stuff like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and what was the
Which one are you thinking about?
Boogeyman, the Boogeyman films, and they went on into the 80s. The first one was like 79, I think. The one with the mirror, where the mirror breaks. The guy sees his mom being...
Oh, you mean the actual movie called Boogeyman?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Exactly.
Yuli Lamel, I think is his
Yeah,
name.
Huey Lamel did that. And then in the 90s, you had your 90s slasher genre, which now we're talking about the whodunit guy in a costume movies like I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Urban Legend, and stuff like that. Scream, where it's just a guy in a costume. It's not a monster
Yeah.
or a freak or whatever. It's just a psychopath in a costume.
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that the early '80s and mid '80s were films in which the slasher films relied on a lot of suspenseful and horror aspects in order to tell the story. But once sequels overpowered them in the late '80s to '90s, it became more about killing people
I had an idea. Did
and
you
how
hear
to
that?
kill people.
I had another idea.
So that's what those were for. And that's just the way that, the horror genre works. It starts off with what they think audiences are liking and appreciating, and it keeps going until they stop liking and appreciating, and then it changes. Hence why, when the 90s came around, most of these slasher films were funny. We
Right.
got into a time where, audiences were no longer surprised by these slashers, and so they had to do something else, so they made them laugh instead of making them scream.
Exactly. Well, that was the whole deal. You got to capture the audience somehow. And if you've got a movie that's doing the same thing over and over, same story, different face, different kill, you got to do something to change it up to make it interesting. Because they were pumping out a serious amount of slasher films in the 80s. And when I say a serious amount, we couldn't even tip the iceberg if we just started naming them and didn't stop for an hour.
Yeah, because there's a lot of slasher films that I've seen that Ron hasn't seen, and there's some that he's seen and I haven't seen. I mean, we don't mention all of them in this episode because he hasn't seen some that I have seen, and I haven't seen some that he has seen. I mean, there's a plethora of slasher flicks out there, and the 80s were huge, not just with slashers, but also other genres. Like, we had lots of killer animal films, like we mentioned earlier, with Alligator and Grizzly, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. There was supernatural films started to come out, ghost stories. I mean, the horror genre was big business in the 80s.
And we have the Japanese to thank for all those ghost stories, because they really liked that shit back in the 90s. And, you know, with The Ring and all that stuff. They were coming out with a lot of remakes of Japanese ghost horror films, and just remaking them in America.
I think that's about all we can say about 80s slasher films. I'm sure that when we get into 90s slasher films, or even slasher films in the modern era, we'll have different things to say. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely, a lot more to say, because the thing about the 80s, it's pretty much same thing, different face every time. I can't really think of any 80s slasher film that really stood out as being apart from all the rest. I mean, even Jason, as big as he was, big a hit as he was still just the same old, same old. Okay, he's a zombie now. But Freddy was a dream monster, and Michael Myers was just this unstoppable person. So those are monsters to me. They're not, but they're still slashers, because that's their MO.
I do want to add, though, that in this modern day and age, the filmmakers and storytellers are referencing these 80 films for modern day audiences. Hence why you have the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street remakes, which are bloodier and gorier and darker than their predecessors. Well, like I said...
and My Bloody Valentine remake. That was my favorite of the remakes. I wanted everybody to know my favorite of the remakes of the 80 horror films, which My Bloody Valentine came out in 81. It is a very good film. You can watch that film today and enjoy it. Yeah, it's a tad campy, but it's actually a really good film. Some good kills. The sequel, awesome. Of course, it's got one of my favorite actors, Jensen Ackles from Supernatural. But it's
remake,
awesome.
Not sequel.
Remake. Sorry. I keep saying sequel. Remake.
We're doing sequels
I'm
later.
used to saying sequel because we're talking about 80s horror flicks. They did sequels.
Every one of them did sequels. Well, I guess that's all for this week's episode. Thank you for listening, and my name is Kevin L. Powers, and...
I'm Ron McLellen.
And this has been Conversations in Horror.
Conversation in Horror is produced by Ron McLellen and Kevin L. Powers. The views of this program are not the views of Broken Lighthouse Pictures. Conversation in Horror is copyright 2015 Broken Lighthouse Pictures. All rights reserved.